So today we are going to be talking about fundamental value. And basically what that means is that we're going to try to figure out simple ways of understanding what things are worth. So our fundamental question is, what is value? Now, that may or may not be an easy question, but if we put it this way, if we have price and we have value, what is the difference? Well, price is what you pay, right? And the value is what you get. So really what we're trying to figure out when we're trying to figure out the fundamental value is how much something is worth to us, not necessarily what we're paying, right? And why would it be this way? Well, obviously you want to pay less than it's worth to you if you want to make a profit. And Warren Buffett says basically price is what you pay and value is what you get. Now, we have this question here, what is value? So now the question becomes sort of, how can we measure value? And my tip here would be to use the KISS principle because it doesn't need to be very complicated. And the trick for you guys would be to think in terms of doing this straightforward. What is the simplest way of doing this if we're talking about a business? Well, first of all, we have book values, right? So accounting value. You just look in the books, you see what's on there in terms of assets, and you say good. Now, for most of you, what does that mean? Well, that means your bank account, for instance. It gives you a straight off answer to how much your bank account is worth. Another alternative, of course, is to use something straightforward as payback time. What does payback time really mean? Well, simply put, it is how long it takes you, how many periods before you get your investment back. Now, this seems very complicated. If you write it as a math equation, it would look something like now, this looks really complicated, but what we're really only saying here is how many periods do I need to get my money back? And payback time isn't unreasonable. This is what you would do for a lot of investments, right? How long does it take me before I get my money back? For instance, in venture capital, this is a very valid question. I give you my money, you're trying to make it back, how long until I have it back? And then, of course, if you know that, then the question is, how big is the upside? Alternatively, you can use sort of more advanced techniques. So, of course, those of you who have had an investments course before probably know about the concept of net present value. And what is net present value? Well, net present value basically says you have some cash flow at time zero. And then what we're looking at here is some payback period, or at least some projected payback period, with an expected cash flow, so some money coming back, hopefully, or expected, over some kind of discount rate K, and hopefully here, this is some kind of, this cash flow here is an investment, right? So this is a minus, these are hopefully pluses, they can go both ways, but the total of this should be positive. So the cash flows over time are positive in terms of the value today. Now this is the basic concept that most people that have an MBA or some kind of course in investments have learned. Now this can be translated into something which is referred to as the internal rate of return. So what does an IRR imply? Well, it basically means that your NPV is 0. So what we're looking for here now is simply put that you put this to 0, which means if this is a negative number, what you're looking at here is essentially a rate of return, which puts your investment equal to your future cash flows. So we write this up, CF, the expected cash flow divided by, but here is the trick, the IRR, like so. So what is the difference between the NPV and the IRR? Well, simply put, what we're looking at here is discounting the expected cash flows. For the IRR, we're looking for the rate, which would be that we discount these cash flows back so that it's equal to the amount that we invested. And typically, people are taught that this is an inferior method to the NPV, but that isn't really true. There's differences here. Here you have a required rate of return. Now that actually requires that you know what that is. And for some investments that may not be possible. And as such, if you're doing a risky investment where there isn't really much to compare with, knowing this number, which hypothetically gives you an estimate for this number, is quite helpful. What do I mean by that? Well, think of it this way. You have this new startup, something fantastic, and you look at it. Your expected cash flows, and you sort of do the math and try to figure out here, what is really the return that I would need to require to get my money back. And if you're looking at this IRR and it says 30 or 40% annually, we don't really need to know whether or not that is above our required rate of return. That is still a very good return, depending on, of course, how much you invest and so on. So this is a reasonable way of doing it if you have no clue what a reasonable risk-adjusted return should be. So with the internal rate of return, there are essentially 3 pitfalls. So pitfall number 1 are basically cash flows that are the opposite of an investment. So let's say that we have some kind of delayed investment, if you like. So we receive 10, and then we pay back 5, 5, and 5. Now what is this? Well, you borrow the money, buy the house, then you go and pay back your mortgage. Would you prefer a low or high mortgage rate? Yep, exactly. You want to have a low rate if it's a cash flow that's a delayed investment, or essentially a loan. So you have to make sure which way it goes in order to do that. The pitfall we have, that is the second pitfall, is what is referred to as sort of multiple IRRs. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that you have a cash flow here, which is essentially 10 minus 5 minus 5 minus 5 and then 10 again. And in terms of our profile, what is happening here? Well, now we have 2 points. So if we solve the internal rate of return here, there will be several points in time where this is going to be a plus. So the zeros that we're looking for won't actually work for us the way that we normally would expect it to. So in terms of a curve, what this would look like is essentially this, and we're trying to find the point, right? And so here there are several solutions, which then doesn't really give us a correct answer. So it's dangerous when you have a cash flow that turns back positive or back negative. And then the third one, which is pitfall number 3, is non-existent. And what does that mean? Well, let's say we have 10, 5, 5, 5. Now we have a cash flow which never really turns 0. So our NPV is always positive, right? And that's also a problem because now we don't sort of know where it is. So I can illustrate this first one looking like this as well. Here we have 1 point. And these are sort of the pitfalls or the things that you need to understand with regards to the internal rate of return. As long as you know these things, as long as you have an understanding of what's going on, that it isn't just we want the high number, but we have to understand if it's a high or low number. We understand that if we have a cash flow that will turn positive and negative over the period, well then it's not going to give us a sensible answer. And then finally, we actually need to have a cash flow that has a 0 NPV at some point in time, then we are good to go. And then we can use it. Now, is it better to use a risk-adjusted NPV? Probably. But we have to keep in mind that what we're doing here is not really science, but more craftsmanship, and we have to understand what we're doing when we're doing it.